So to start out on a practical note of kind of what would all this be like and what do you need to consider before you take the jump to starting something like this? First of all, it is a time commitment to do agritourism. So even if it's, a campsite is probably your least time consuming, but let's say you have a glamping area, you have a bus, you are going to have to take the time to communicate with guests. You're going to have to take the time to show them around if they have questions, to be available if something goes wrong, and of course to clean up and change in between guests. Some of this does come as quite an inconvenience. If a guest comes in at 9:30 at night and they're having a problem with water or electricity, you as the host need to be there to fix it and, try to be around it. There are measures you can take that you say, I'm not available after a certain time, try to check in early, but there will always be some inconvenience to people being around. So that's just something to consider. Another one and a big one is liability. And I'll go over with you very quickly that Airbnb does boast a $1 million liability policy, but I'll also tell you that as a host and being around a lot of other hosts, this is often not always something that covers you for a variety of different reasons, some fair and some unfair. So with liability, yes, you have coverage, and yes, we'll go over more about what insurance you should cover to make sure that you have a backup for your backup. But of course, if a guest starts a campfire and lights a field on fire, that is a liability to you, to your livestock, to the systems you're creating. So kind of think about, we'll go through different things you can do to greatly limit that liability, but there is a liability component. Another one that is kind of a barrier for a lot of people who do kind of breeding in animals that might be more susceptible to disease is a biosecurity risk. People are traveling from all across the United States. We get a lot of international guests. And so, of course, if they came from somewhere and brought something on their shoes and they walk around the farm, there is a biosecurity risk. We raise a lot of animals to be super, super hardy, and that's a focus of ours. So we don't necessarily take biosecurity as into consideration as other people do, but I know this is a concern for a lot of farmers. And the last thing is additional costs. It's never just as simple as I'm going to bring in some extra money. A lot of counties have a tax that they have on Airbnb that's additional to your property taxes and such things. That is usually 3 to 5% of what you're making. So our county, it's 5%. And some of the other additional costs would be that increased insurance and just kind of other things that you don't think about, So if somebody is sleeping on sheets, those sheets usually have a lifespan of maybe 20 to 100, people sleeping on them before they get destroyed. And that's not necessarily something that you would charge a guest. It's just normal wear and tear of doing business. So kind of replacing things that need to be replaced after guests used. If you offer toothbrushes, just kind of simple things, but that they do need to be taken into account, that those will be part of things. So also in offering your night rates, what do you offer, and make sure that those costs are covered when you're doing things like that. So my things to do and not do when you host, I would definitely start with checking your local ordinances before you get serious about doing any of this. Every county has different regulations, and particularly if you're closer to a big city, they're going to be more tough. Some places just don't allow you to rent a room as part of the home. The county beside us will only allow you to either rent the entire unit or nothing at all. So those are things to consider. Will they allow campsites? Will they allow other things? Most are very flexible, but you will find 1 or 2 counties have very, very strict short-term rental policies, and you want to know that before you invest any time and energy in getting this started. The second one is to increase your insurance coverage to cover the short-term rentals. We kind of just made the assumption that the Airbnb policy would be enough, and when they didn't pay out for things, we found it really was not. So I encourage every single person to have an increased insurance policy, because if you have an insurance policy on your home, that's only for the people living there. They are not going to cover anything that might go wrong with a short-term rental because it's outside the scope of what they do. So I don't think you'll ever have to use it significantly. My hope is you'll never have to use it, but I highly, highly recommend that you have it just in case for something catastrophic. Again, a guest has a campsite, it lights a barn on fire, you need a new barn replaced. That's what insurance is for, and definitely make sure that you have that safety net. We've been doing this for 3 years. We've never filed a claim once, but I'm happy we have it there just in case. And the last thing on my definite to-dos is, again, state regulations on agritourism signs. So this also applies to if you do farm tours, if you do anything that is also considered agritourism activities. Every state has a level that you have to do for those. So we live in Virginia. We are required to have an agritourism disclosure sign at all entrances and exits of the farm. It's a, plaque panel that's huge and has to be of certain height and dimensions. That is all that's required of our state. Other states have different ones. So just go to your, local ordinances, your state ordinance, ask a local rep what is recommended. And I also can help you walk through where to find those signs. They mass make them for fairly reasonable rates. Just make sure you have all the different signage required of your locality on your farm. And here are my big things of what I do not recommend and I found that are really big barriers to getting started with this. Fireplaces and grills. Airbnb doesn't really care what you do, but your insurance company definitely does. So we found that if we had fireplaces and outdoor grills, that our insurance company rates were extremely high to almost some just wouldn't even give us a policy on it. So you can do different options. In one unit of the house, we did have a wood stove. We literally just removed the stove because it was inoperable and not being used. We had put an electric system. So yes, while, it still has a chimney and all those things, it removed the guest's ability to start fires in the house. And the insurance company was comfortable to write us a policy that was $700 a year cheaper than the previous one. So fire is a big deal to them. Usually they'll be okay with outdoor fire pits that are pulled away, especially things that are not mobile. Barbecues outside, they are high demand. People love cooking outside, but if they're on wheels, the insurance company tends to frown on them as they can roll them close to the house, melt the siding, all that kind of good stuff. So definitely talk with your insurance company about if fire is make or break and how they feel about that, because I think monetarily you'll elect not to have those things if that's an option for you. Another thing that was a big barrier for our insurance company is making sure the guests had supervision around the animals. And I don't mean this that guests have to be watched every single minute of every day that they're outside, because we just don't have the time to do that. But the guests had very clear what you can and cannot do. So our yard has a lot of different pens that surround it, and at every single pen it says, do not enter without supervision. Animals bite, animals kick. Like there's many, many signs that you can buy. But there was no area that guests wander into and go, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. And we learned this the hard way. We had guests that came onto our farm before we were really kind of more serious about it. And we look out the window and one day there are strangers and infant children standing out near cattle and bull that were not ours. They were a different farmer's. And that is such a huge liability, because if the cows had kicked or bit or run in, whatever could have happened, we would have absolutely been liable that we did not provide that signage. Guests didn't know they were not allowed there. So I'll go over it later, but we have a lot of signs in the house that make where guests can go and how to interact with the animals safely very, very clear. And also we have submitted all of this to insurance. So that's also very important. Here's just a quick example of the agritourism sign that's required for VA. Most states are very similar, just you'll have all the code information, and I'll link to where you can purchase these online. Also in this photo, you'll see some of our animals will bite fingers. Our donkeys 90% of the time are really great, but for people who just maybe have not been around animals as much, is just a warning to kind of pay attention to your hands and your fingers when you feed animals. Signs like this, the insurance company really, really loves, because it prevents you from being liable if fingers get nibbled on, and minor appendage removals would be not covered because you warned the guest. Again, we've been doing this for years. It has never happened, but these signs are really great to indicate the guests to be aware and not to be too relaxed around animals that they don't know, which is what farm people know, but not necessarily people who grew up on a farm are going to be at your rental. This is also some other ones, particularly for people doing regenerative farming, is that you need to definitely label all electric fences. People don't realize polywire is electric, so with kids and stuff, we have tons and tons of signs, and we usually like to have a permanent fence barrier in between where guests are, and then a temporary fence that might be electric. We have put extra of these warning signs on our polywire and our netting anytime that that's not an option, that it's kind of like close to the house. But Definitely make sure it's noted. If you're rotating through an area that's closer to guests, I usually send them a message before they even get on site. I do have electric fence up in the yard. It has signs. Please just be aware, particularly if they have young kids that run around. Usually they take it in stride if you've warned them, but I just don't want anyone to have to figure out how to do that and how to avoid a negative review if some kid gets shocked, which again has happened, but because we warned them, they realized it was more their issue than ours. All right, next thing I want to talk about is what platforms you can list on. You can definitely just list on one and hope it goes well, but we list on a couple just to try to pick up some extra traffic, and this is also going to be based on what your offering is. Airbnb, you can list pretty much everything under the sun. HipCamp is more geared towards those campers, those RVs, those other get outdoorsy kind of thing. Farmstay USA offers a whole bunch of different things, but I will say that this platform really focuses more on interactive stays. For example, they like you to provide meals and give farm tours, and this is kind of a highly interactive section. Another one that is kind of emerging but doesn't quite have as much traffic is Yonder. This is more geared towards nature lovers and people that want to connect with things, so you're going to see a lot more glamping and a lot more natural stays on this one. And of course, then you go down to Glamping Hub and glamping.com. You're going to look at glamping quite obviously. And the last one I just want to include, because some people ask about it, is Harvest Hosts. I don't love this platform because this is mainly geared towards people who are traveling in RVs, and they want to encourage people to stay with you, but they don't pay to stay with you. What the benefit is that they come with the intention to buy products. So this is geared towards a lot of wineries and vineyards, that you roll up and you're doing wine tastings and you're buying bottles of wine, and they get a free place to park their RVs with hookups. So this might not be a perfect fit for everyone, but if you have a farm store and you sell a lot of product to travelers, this is kind of the one spot for you. But I do not really recommend it for other people, because you're essentially just hosting RVs for free, which you could just host RVs and get paid for doing that. So that's how Harvest Host works. All right, next I want to go over all the tips and tricks and things that I have messed up and done badly and done well and figured out over 3 years that I wish somebody had told me to save me a lot of headache with my guests. Some are going to seem pretty straightforward, but it's, just a little bit extra thought that goes into it. One of the big problems, of course, with the regenerative movement is that nobody knows what the word regenerative means yet in a consumer area. So if you go ahead and put your farm up and say, we're a regenerative farm, not a lot of people are going to know what that is. So some of my tricks and tips for promoting your farm is going to be not to use the word regenerative, but to use other things that make your farm unique. So in the beginning, you want to have a standout photo. Like, what is it the guests are coming to experience? We are in the Blue Ridge Mountains. You kind of have this solitude getaway, like out in the country. So ours is a comfy chair on a back porch looking out at the views of the mountains. That's our initial here we are photo. And then after that, you kind of then list what are the next most important things. And what's kind of odd about our place is people are not staying here for our bedroom. So our photo series actually goes beautiful vistas, unique donkey that we have, and another picture of goats, followed by then we go into the rooms, the picture of the bed, the picture of the bathrooms attached, and so on. We find that the room isn't why people are coming here. They're coming for the experience of staying in the mountains. So that should be your number one photo, and we can go more into that later. The next section is to write a description for your perfect guest. So who do you want to come stay with you? Like, are they nature people? Are they people with kids? Like, think about who exactly is the people who would most enjoy your farm and write it to them. Also in this section, it's very important to write any deal breakers. So for our location, we do not have cell phone service. We do offer Wi-Fi in place of it, but that obviously is a pretty major thing to people, that they want to be within Wi-Fi range. So that's the first listing is, no Wi-Fi, only cell phone, and then we continue on to the rest of it. But that way we used to have a whole lot of problems that information was in the second or fourth, farther down in the listing, and people would get really mad because they didn't read that far. So you have to really list anything that is kind of major, and it's not necessarily that people won't come, they just need to have that disclosed beforehand. Also, one of the other tricks that I've added in our list of photos is to list any photos of local attractions. In our area, we have a lot of really nice hikes with super scenic vistas at the end of it. So we would list a picture of that iconic vista and its name on it. So it's not, so people don't misconstrue that that is in your backyard, but you would say, this local attraction is 20 miles from our house, 10 miles from our house, or whatever. So that way, when they're scrolling through, they can see other things that they would be doing in the area without having to go into different parts of the website to find those things. Another trick I have is to write a really great welcome message for people. And you may think this is a little bit of overkill, but I can kind of assure you it's not. After your first 5 to 10 guests, you'll find that people often ask you the same question over and over again. In this welcome message, you can address those questions so you don't have to continually be addressing them with guests. So we have issues that sometimes our GPS does not route correctly. So I write in, this is how you make sure your GPS routes correctly. How do you get in the front door? Does it stick? Give it an extra push. Just anything you can think of to make sure that the most stupid person in the world can make it into your Airbnb or your agritourism without having any issues. And that's what you do in your welcome message. And if they don't read it, it's on them and they can refer back to it if they have any issues. But sometimes we have guests who check in at 11 o'clock at night, midnight. I don't want to be there letting them in. So they have all these messages to fall back on so that they don't have to call me or wake me up in the middle of the night. Another very silly trick I've learned is to create reminders in your agritourism stay to be present, grateful, and thankful. And this was kind of a weird thing that happened in about the middle of the pandemic as people were very frustrated and angry and they were on edge when they were traveling and just generally not very happy. And we were actually getting worse reviews because people were just in bad moods while they were traveling. And so in this, we found that the more we put out reminders to be thankful, grateful, happy, our reviews instantly went back to being 5-star. And I don't know if this is a psychological trick or what the game is, but the more we put out these signs to be happy, fun, smile, even though they seem very cheesy and dumb, they really changed it. And they saved us from a lot of really bad reviews during a weird time. And we have not had anywhere near the bad reviews since then. And it's just about, how is that person's experience when they're there? What are they bringing with them? Did they bring a bad flight? Did they have an altercation with people in the real world? Don't bring that where you are. You get to create the environment for the guests that you want them to be in. Another thing to go over is when you start listing on these sites, they will allow you to be booked indefinitely. I highly encourage you to change your booking window. We usually do 3 months to a year, depending on the listing. But for campsites, I would not go out more than 3 months. You don't know what the weather is going to be. And if we have an early winter or something, you're going to have people who are wanting refunds. Some people book really, really far in advance to be prepared, but that's just going to end up in a lot of cancellations. This works well for some who are early planners. I'm not saying it's the worst thing to do, but for us personally, we found 3 months, 6 months is the best because that way people do know and are more likely to complete their stays as opposed to if they book and then, oh, well, we didn't know what things were happening. Things have changed since then and we need to cancel. So every time somebody books and cancels, that's something that you have to deal with and, be aware of. And the less you can do that, the more efficient you will be. Another thing that's important about that is to block any dates that you would not be happy to host guests. This is kind of a give and take with us. We do host on Thanksgiving because we find it's a great time for families to gather, be around farm animals, experience something different, but we do not host on Christmas because we just want to spend it with family and don't want to be working. So it just kind of depends on, would you be willing to deal with people during that time? And I will say every Thanksgiving rental we've had has been a higher interaction with guests. They need more, they ask more questions about the kitchen, they have more concerns. And that's very typical of holiday gatherings. So if you can't deal with that on the holidays, you can go ahead and block those dates out so they can't be booked. It's something you can very easily do, but just things to think of ahead of time. If you want to not be hosting people, make sure your calendar is blocked out and that you are not accepting guests at that time. I also bring this up because you would think, oh, well, I'll just cancel it if it happens. If you cancel for Airbnb, they will penalize your account, and I think more people are adapting this method. So your goal to be a host is to not cancel listings because they will penalize your account for it. Another trick is to use price adjusting software. So in the beginning, we just listed our rental and put it at a price, and that's the price it always was. In our area, we live about 30 minutes from a university, so there's a lot of dates that are more appealing to others. So we had football games, we had basketball games, a whole bunch of stuff. And a room that we rent for usually $75 to $80 a night, we could rent to the upwards of $110, $140 a night because of limited housing in the area. With a price adjusting software, they figure all these algorithms out for you. And in these, we found we made a lot more money by letting them adjust the prices and change things. And what's nice is you can also just turn this off and on as you needed to. There's a whole bunch of different ones that do it, and they usually only take a percentage of what they get for you. So if they increase your rental by $40, they take 1%, they take, 40 cents off of it. So we really like price adjusting software. The next one is to put signs everywhere and anywhere, all over, inside and outside. We showed you some of the pictures of the farm animals to, bite toes, electric fence, all that good stuff, but it equally works as well for inside the house. In the Airbnb app, you can list what the Wi-Fi login is, but if they can't get onto the app, they can't really get the Wi-Fi login. So we have little signs all around our house with the Wi-Fi passwords. And the more signs, the better, because just when people are there, they don't want to look in a different place. So even simple things like, how does your coffee maker work? We have little instructions that we left on the side of it, or we leave the manual close. Something that might happen for a lot of people who live in towns, we have a septic system as opposed to a city system. So we had to convey to guests that we have a septic tank and not to flush certain things. And we leave little funny signs out that guests really enjoy and will sometimes comment on that they really like them. And another thing that we also found to do to mitigate guests leaving you grumpy reviews because of something wasn't the way they wanted it is we found that people are not always willing to ask you, like, hey, my battery remotes and the television weren't working, or the solar charger that ran the outdoor lights wasn't on, so we couldn't sit outside. They won't necessarily message you. But I put up this sign in our, kitchen area, and I said, please do talk to us. And at the end of the welcome message, it says, if you have any issues, let us know. So you also can use these signs to reiterate, like, we truly want you to have a great stay. We're here for you. Let us know. Another fun thing that we found to add to the experience of being on a farm is that we list reading material for guests when they come. So a lot of people that are traveling, they're traveling and they go out of their way to unique places because they want to have a different experience. So let's say that somebody is coming in and they're, camping on your farm. We have a binder that goes in campsites, buses, everywhere that tells a little bit about our farm, us, and what we're doing. And this is kind of your first way to say, give them some ideas, information on what regenerative farming is. Tell them a little bit about your farm animals, what matters to you, and this is kind of the first good touch point of how to start connecting with your guests. We also include some books for kids, such as Goodnight Farm. If people are trying to get their kids to sleep and they want to read something farm themed, it helps deepen that experience that you're on a farm reading farm books to kids. And kind of, the books that you set out, the videos or the DVDs or things your TVs are programmed to. In that experience, are they being programmed to educational things to help bring the guests to your location through experience? We like doing that, and we think it really gives people a better experience and stay on our farm. Another one that will really save you a lot of time is to use keypads and automatic systems for anything that you would need. Obviously, with campsites and stuff, that's not as essential, but if you're doing room rentals or you have a bus that locks, if you get a keypad, you then do not have to be there. You do not have to worry about guests losing the keys or walking off with keys by accident and then trying to hunt them down before the next guest gets there. Go ahead and put automatic keypads in for anything, put passwords. There is now enough unique software that the passwords will actually change between guests so they can't come back. And there's a lot of really great technology that's out there for Airbnbs right now. And my last big piece of advice for tips is to not list as the cheapest place. And I want to take you down a story real quick, is because when we first started, we were feeling very insecure about our offerings. We had never done this. Our offerings didn't feel as elaborate as some of the other ones in the area. So we listed our rooms for very, very cheap. And this caused so many problems. We had a lot of people that just had no interest on being on farm. They just needed somewhere affordable to stay. And while this isn't a big deal for a lot of them, we ended up with a lot of bad situations because of this. One, for example, was that we had a guy show up who was clearly on drugs. We couldn't tell what he was doing, but he was not making eye contact, not communicating well. He was being very irrational. And he was also one of those guests that took off into the field where animals were. And we don't know why he was doing that, but we knew it was a liability. So, whatever the scenario is, you are responsible for creating the attraction and bringing people here. And that was really bad. So we found that the more cheaply we were listed, the more problematic guests we had. And we slowly started incrementally raising our price until we kind of leveled out, that we were getting much more high quality guests that were really excited and intentionally being here, rather than people who just needed to save a buck and were willing to drive the little distance, and be away from a hotel. But I definitely encourage you to be listed higher than the cheapest person around you, at least as your base point start. You're going to save yourself a ton of headaches. Your offering is probably a lot better than you're envisioning it as your head. And I am happy to talk to people about exactly what price that should be listed. But it's also something you're definitely going to learn in time, as you will find, people will pay for value, people will pay for things. So don't necessarily try to be the budget stay. You can definitely list as cheap. We definitely want to be inclusive and get as many people to the farm as possible. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you want to be the budget friendly and you don't want to compete with, low end hotels, motels, because you're just kind of inviting a lot of problems to your own personal farm.